another special session for our good friend Klaus. Yeah, I think it's a little bit late. Actually, we need to all summarize our work before it was too late. Klaus had his last session with us on his hospital bed. But, we didn't realize things were already so bad. Anyway, we get together today. We have 4 discussants having 4 presentations. We're trying to identify Klaus's best contribution to us, to the country, to the society, and to the knowledge base, and to the civilization. Fred?
Sure. Well, I thanks so much, Jason. And I am honored to be here today, honoring Klaus. I see this more as a conversation between us, which also fits to try to have a session that also fits with the ideas that Klaus was trying to develop throughout his life, being a professor of communication, but also challenging the very ideas of what communication was, and to bring cybernetic ideas to how we think about communication and information. But also to honor his background in design and how he saw connections between all of these things. I thought, so I thought I would do something a little bit unusual, although it's not clear what unusual actually is here. So just a short story, which is that I think one of the things I had known Klaus since 1971. So, and this is not meant to say who knew Klaus longer, but I was a student of his in his models of communication class, and I was kind of in awe of and mystified by what it was that he was trying to do, bringing cybernetics into communication. But so what I'd like to do is to just tell one brief story about how I think one of the challenges that and opportunities from Klaus's work that we can really build on is how he was always challenging himself. And a lot of his work, whether it was in design or communication or cybernetics or systems, was challenging others to get at their basic assumptions. But in doing so, he also very much took reflexivity seriously and was always challenging himself. And so one story was that this was because we also wrote things together, even while I was a student, and then even afterwards. He would give me a paper of his to read and just say, can you offer some comments on it? And so one time I would read it and say, you know, Klaus, this is actually pretty good. And he would look me right in the eye and say, I'm not so sure. And I realized that it wasn't clear to me whether he was challenging, whether I was just agreeing with him to be nice, or he was even doubting his own work and was expecting more criticism. But I think this is the way that he was. He would put, very much like Gregory Bateson, whose name he chose as a title for his position at the Annenberg School, offering ideas publicly, but at the same time having some doubt about them. And what I thought I could do, and it's possible he read this on this session that he participated in from his bed, but toward the end of his life, he actually was working on a book about metaphor. And Marge Thorell, his wife, shared a poem from that he had written just before he died. And I'd like to open this session by reading the poem. It will take maybe a minute or two. So the poem was called Metaphor, a Better Picture of the World. And in it, you can see that Klaus very much reveled in the ideas of paradox and contradiction, at the same time trying to point things forward. So it reads, I want to write a small book of a foundational nature with regard to language. Over the last millennium, people have had a misunderstanding of human nature and of determinism. Aristotle and others had the idea that everything is going in one direction. Abstract forms come to earth and everything is supposed to go in that direction. This is called the logic of determinism. This theory doesn't understand the nature of the process of speaking. If one is understanding and thinking that everything is coming from mathematics, it is a false belief. Math is a very powerful language that misguides. Mathematics is spoken by mathematicians who have the freedom of defining any term that they like. People speak with one another through metaphor. It is complicated, but the simplest form to explain this is to say that we talk about one thing in terms of another. Metaphor connects experience with phenomena in the minds and experiences of people. This is not a deterministic, but a metaphorical conception of language. There are different ways of speaking, and they have tremendously different implications for everyday life. Different languages have different effects. For example, fascism, interpersonal relationships, creative words and stories all have different effects. They're always understood within their language communities. What we see now with Trump, speaking as an American here, is the end of democracy. It is important to critique language and to understand who speaks for what purpose and what is dominant and what should be eliminated. That is another element that has to do with Aristotle and with everything going in one direction. In 1943, Norbert Wiener discovered cybernetics as a control device. Now we're stuck with this conception of the control of human beings, including their languages. Cybernetics has its own language. It has no space for metaphors. Working with metaphorical forms gives a better picture of the world. So you get a sense of the contradiction even in the conclusion. There's a lot in this, and I think one of the things for me is Klaus's recognition of the importance of metaphor, of seeing things as something else and having a repertoire of making those connections. But even metaphor itself is not deterministic. And he brought this to his work in such a huge variety of fields, from product semantics, where he challenged the very idea of what semantics was in the form of what designers do, to information theory, where he, on the one hand, accepted the notion of information as reduction of uncertainty from Shannon and Weaver, but at the same time opened up places for what negative information might be like. Can I say something that rather than reducing uncertainty, increases the uncertainty? And what might that actually mean? But always applying these to himself. So there is this self-referential aspect to all that he was doing. Yeah, so I'd like to just leave that as an opening to ways of exploring the vast variety of fields that his work touched on, but true to his being a cybernetician was this notion of always opening up space to challenge, to understand, and at the same time challenge the assumptions that guide us, including our own ways of being in the world. So thanks for giving me a little bit of space there. Yeah, many other stories. I worked very closely with him for over 50 years. Klaus even read at our wedding. So there is a deep personal connection too.